I bet you can remember walking out of more than one IEP meeting or clicking that Zoom button to leave the meeting with that sinking feeling like, this meeting has been like every other IEP meeting. And hardly anything of what you said is going to be written in the IEP. Because that draft IEP that you asked to get before the meeting? Well, that one is going to be pretty much the one that gets finalized. So today we're going to focus on something absolutely vital to becoming more proactive when you're advocating for your child, instead of reacting to what the school has already written. So the strategy that you learned today is not going to be just about prepping and getting your input ready. The strategy that you're going to learn today is about balancing the power at the IEP table. So if this perks your interest, stay tuned because So welcome. If you're watching live or on the replay, say hi. And I want you to know, as an advocate, I'm here to help support you, to have you shape the IEP and not just watch it unfold before your eyes. So my promise for you today is we're going to learn 2 steps to becoming more proactive when writing the IEP for your child. Now, the biggest problem comes after you get the invitation for the IEP meeting, and the first thing you think of is like, I got to remember, I have to email the special ed teacher and ask for a copy of the IEP before the meeting. Now, you might be wondering, why am I calling this a big problem, asking for a copy of the draft IEP? Well, stick with me because I know you've been told so many times by advocates, including me, and other parents to always ask for a copy of the draft IEP before you go to the meeting, because you've been told that when you read the IEP ahead of the draft IEP ahead of time, you get a flavor of what's going to be talked about. You are more efficient at the meeting actually runs more efficiently, and you have then time to write your parental input. Well, the problem comes when you get that draft IEP after all the staff has already written their input, because at that point, it's going to be tough to get the staff to make big changes even when you give your feedback. So the mistake is you set yourself up to be in a reactive mode because you wait to react to the draft IEP that's already been written by the staff. And the mistake of being in a reactive mode is causing another problem. Not much of your input gets written into the actual IEP. Now, if you want a strength-based IEP that supports your child being included, simply sprinkling some of your input throughout that pre-written draft isn't going to cut it. So it's like, when you provide input after reading the drafted IEP, it's like seasoning a meal after it's been cooked. Yeah, you can add some bits of flavor here and there, but you can't change the basic ingredients. And we want your child's IEP to have those basic ingredients, which includes your voice in that draft. So the other problem I see often is that you think, okay, I've got to write this parental input statement, and you just try to cram everything in there, your vision for your child, the goals you want them to work on, what inclusion looks like. I mean, you just try to cram everything in. And I understand that's what you've been told and taught by the school. You've been told that, yes, you can give your input as long as it fits in this, right, one little text box, usually at the beginning of the IEP, because you've been taught that the rest of the IEP is for the professionals to give their input, write down what they think the laundry list is of your child's needs, what they think the goals should be, what they think the services should look like. They'll want to put in their favorite accommodations, whether or not it really applies to your child. They are the ones that are determining how much time your child's going to be included. So how can we change that? How can you become proactive when it comes to writing your child's IEP? So before we get into those steps of what to do, let's remember that there's two outdated advocacy strategies that you need to stop doing. So I want you to stop waiting for the school's draft IEP before you give your input. I want you to stop thinking that you have to write your parental input all in this one statement that will fit in this one box. Because when you continue to use these outdated advocacy strategies, you're going to continue to feel defeated, to question yourself after every meeting, to worry if you're doing enough. So am I saying you shouldn't ask for a copy of the draft IEP ahead of time? No, I still want you to do that. But there's an essential first step before you even ask for a draft. So let me know in the chat if you want to know what to do first, what to do. I'm going to take a sip of water. So instead of putting time and energy into responding to the school's draft IEP, let's talk about that first essential step of being proactive. And what does proactive look like? Well, you give your input before the school writes the draft. By being proactive, you can make sure that your child's strengths, their unique needs, how they learn best, all of that important information from your perspective is in that foundations of the IEP, not just an afterthought. So the problem when we're not proactive is your input just comes too late in the process, because often that's when that draft IEP is almost finalized. So you end up tweaking the document here and there, but you're really not shaping it, being a co-writer, having your voice in the IEP. And that's what we want to make sure happens. And what I see is being proactive isn't just a step in this advocacy strategy, but it's really a shift of how you view yourself as an equal team member, and a shift of how you engage in that whole IEP process. And guess what? That shift can make all the difference in the balance of power at that IEP table. So, Anne Marie says, I finally made a live. I miss everyone. Anne Marie, we're glad you're here. You're just in time for the next crucial step, which is to write your input in each section of the IEP, because this will help you go from being a backseat driver, giving advice that nobody wants to hear, to being a co-writer of your child's IEP. So without your input throughout the IEP, it's just going to look like this generic IEP that could apply to any kid. It's not going to be an individualized, personalized plan. They're not going to capture your child's unique needs and learn how to capitalize on their strengths. So before, and that's the key word, before that draft IEP is written by the school, you write your input for each section of the IEP. You want to talk about your child's strengths, their needs, and not just academic needs, but like needs to be included with their second grade classmates, how they learn best. What are your priority goals for this next year? You might have behavior strategies or accommodations that you know work. So as you're writing your input, think about or even look at your child's IEP and how the sections are divided and give input for each one of those sections. Email it to the school ahead of time before, right? The key word before they write the draft, and ask that your input be copied and pasted into the draft IEP, because you don't want somebody summarizing what you said. You want your input copied and pasted as you wrote it into the draft IEP. Now, one of the big keys here is to make sure you explain to the school that what you're sending them is not something you want copied and pasted into that parental input section, but you want the staff to see, oh, she had input on reading and the strengths and the needs and the goals. Now, here's the big key. To get the staff to find points of agreement with the staff and have the staff make sure that your input is there in the reading section, not in the parent input section. So you're like, Charmaine, what's the difference? There's a big difference. Because when the staff agrees with what you see as your child's, for instance, reading strengths, and they put it in that reading section, your input becomes, part of that reading section of the IEP. That carries so much more weight than if it was in your parental input box at the beginning of the meeting. So let me know if this makes sense, if you've got some questions, because my purpose is to help you become an even more proactive advocate for your child. So if you found these tips helpful to stop reacting to draft IEPs that the school's already written and to be proactive and give your input into each section of the IEP before the draft is written. And when it comes time that you're like, I just would like some more support in figuring out this, being a proactive advocate for my child, let me know, because I'd love to sit down and brainstorm some ideas and next steps that you could use. So I am Charmaine Tanner, and I am so pleased that you spent part of your day with us. And I want you to stay tuned to this Facebook page, The Art of Advocacy, because you'll find different posts, different tips and strategies throughout the week. Come back, make comments, get involved in the conversations, because we want to make sure that your child is safe, happy, and learning every day beside their classmates. So let's open it up to some Q&A. Q&A we like. And Marie says, let me see here. Districts, yeah, for sure. She said districts use this technique to wear a parent down and not include a parent as a team member. Exactly. Yes, yes, yes. And that's the thing. I mean, you hear all the time, right? Oh, parents are an equal part of the team. You're an important part. You know your child best. And yet, when you get to the IEP meetings, it's like, it doesn't seem like all of a sudden, the staff is going to see you as this expert on your child. And so that's where thinking differently, acting differently, using different strategies than those worn out strategies that you've tried in the past, that's where you're going to have your voice heard, listened to, and have your input already written in that draft IEP instead of trying to fight for it later. So what do you think? What have been your experiences? Do you usually get a draft IEP ahead of time? Do you have to ask for it? I know in Illinois, just a few years ago, they had a state law that was passed that parents had to receive a copy of the draft IEP and any documents that were going to be shared at the meeting at least 3 days prior to the IEP meeting. So that's a big win. However, again, if you're waiting 3 days before the IEP meeting to get a draft IEP that's already been written by the staff, chances are it's going to be slim for you to have that much impact on changing anything that's already written there. So what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Let me know what usually happens in your school district. And to be fair, there are school districts that are doing a good job at this. There are some school districts that have, be it, a form that they've already developed, but they'll send home with to the parents before the meeting, and they'll ask, for information about your child and things like that, or, your priorities. So there are school districts that are already asking for your input ahead of time. And so we want to make sure that we applaud those districts that are using those practices. And then the other thing is to know that if you're given a form to fill out and it doesn't really include all the things that you want included in the IEP, you can fill out their form and you can give additional input. So don't think that you can only do things one way. Nikki Martin, thanks for being here. She says, how do parents reclaim power once an IEP is finalized to which they disagree? So great question, Nikki. Because even maybe with your input, they're not going to take it, right? And you're going to wind up with an IEP that you don't agree with. And then it's up to the parent to take some action. So there's different things, like some states have a period where the IEP isn't finalized if the parent within 10 days sends an email to say, I disagree with these parts of the IEP. So it really depends on what state you live in. Some states will say, if you don't agree, then you need to sign that you don't agree. Most states don't have something like that. So for sure, I think you follow if you wind up with an IEP that you disagree with and you want to reclaim that power of, like, I'm going to be, driving this car. is to write an email to the staff and, thank them for the parts that you agree with, point out the parts that there's still disagreement. And, depending on what you want to do and the level of disagreement, you could ask for a facilitated IEP meeting. Sometimes they'll still do that, even though they've closed the IEP. So you could ask for that. And that depends on the quality of the facilitators, but usually I find that can be helpful. You can ask for mediation. You could file a state complaint. And the most litigious one, and that costs the most in time, energy, and money, is file for due process hearing. So, yeah, you don't want to have your child live with an IEP that you disagree with. So you do, as a parent, need to take some step to kind of go up that ladder of how to resolve disputes. So let me know, Nikki, if you have a follow-up question there. So Anne says, let me see. I request a draft, but there's a lot of information missing. Collaboration to create the IEP is missing on purpose as a power move from the district. Well, yeah, and see, that's where you have to be savvy, right? And you have to be able to know that, that, I don't know, it's almost like a game that some districts play with parents, and it's like, oh, they want a draft. Okay, so we'll give them a few things to kind of whet their appetite, and hopefully they'll be thankful for that, and they'll stop bugging us. So what we talked about today is reversing that. Stop asking for this draft that's going to be this incomplete thing that's written by the staff. Instead, and this is something that you have to plan for, right, in your calendar, that you have enough time to write your input and give it to the staff before they're going to start writing that draft. And then this is how I usually see the sequence play out when I'm supporting families as an advocate. So the family writes their input, they send it to the district, they ask that it be copied and pasted into the different sections of the IEP. And then the school drafts their input into the IEP. And they send you the draft IEP. The difference is now your input is in there and the staff input is in there instead of it being one-sided. So that's one of the big things that you can do to balance that power. It's you be proactive, share your input first. And then ideally, when we have enough time, once they send us the draft IEP with the parent input in it, then we start reviewing the IEP, typing in questions or specific comments that we want to mention at the IEP. And if you have time, you can send that back to the school before the meeting, and they have an idea of where the conversation needs to happen at the meeting. You know, what are the most kind of parts where there's agreement, but where else are there parts where there's disagreement? So yeah, it makes parents have to do some things several weeks before the meeting. And I know because I mean, I can still remember IEP meetings I went to with my son where, like, the first thing I looked for was, is there a box of Kleenex here? Because I know I'm going to cry at this meeting. So sometimes we can have like PTSD, and even thinking about, shit, next month is going to be the annual review, that can be a trigger for your PTSD. And when you're in that spot, it's going to be really hard, right? To say, oh, good. I remember Charmaine saying weeks before the meeting, I needed to write my IEP. And I realize that can be kind of a big hurdle. And that's why when we get support from each other, it really helps. So let's see what else we have here. So here's a great question. Have you seen any district that would attach parent inputs as additional addendum since the parent input section is limited? Yes, great question. I generally say do not have things be attached as addendums because they get lost. Or like I'll make a request for records and we'll get, a copy of maybe the previous IEP. And it might say in there, see attached parent input. But when they sent me the copy of the IEP, they didn't send me the attachment. So I think it's this false sense of security that, it'll be okay, it'll be attached. No. So what I say instead is, and then one, it depends on the computer software, but they'll say, well, we only have, we can only write so many words or so many characters in this box. I mean, sometimes that box can expand and they can keep writing. However, the strategy that I shared today is don't try to cram everything in that one text box. Instead, say, here's my input for the reading goals. Please put my input in the strengths, section for reading. These are the needs. So you divide out your input throughout the IEP, and you don't play the game of, I've got to get it in this box or I have to attach it, which attachments get lost. So let me know if that helps. IEP goals. Being never satisfied with cookie cutter accommodations and supports, nor with vanilla goals pulled from goal banks. Are there any research-based goal standard IEP goal development frameworks you could recommend? I love this question. And yes, it's called Goal Bank. And and what I can do is after the show, I can come back and give you the specific link. What I really like about Goal Bank, and it's a paid, program. So, the thing is, you can, at least this is how it used to be. You could pay for, like, the building could pay for like a building license to use it, or the district could pay a district license and then all the staff can use it. And what I really like about the Goal Bank as a resource is it really kind of embeds some of the Universal Design for Learning framework into it. And so it's just so much more individualized. The other resource that you can play with is using AI, so artificial intelligence. I have played some with ChatGPT as far as goals. I've played with ChatGPT in lots of ways and how it can help you advocate. And so the goals, that's an interesting thing to do with AI, because you can describe your child's present levels and really do it in a full way, not just, he needs work on decoding. So you can give the AI tool the information, the present level of where your child's functioning, where you want to see them, and you can have chat come up with personalized IEP goals. So there's the traditional computer with Goal Bank, and there's also the AI way that you can go now that we have that available to parents too. So Ann says, too many districts are scheduling annuals within 10 days, so I prompt the district to schedule it earlier. Yeah, and see, that's the thing is, you know when the annual review date, is up on the IEP, even though IEPs technically don't expire. So it's going to be coming up like the middle of October or whatever, like that's when the annual review is going to be. So the end of September is when you start writing your input, and giving it to them before they write the draft and start that whole process. Yeah, and she says parent input should not be limited at all. Exactly. And that's the thing in it. I mean, it helps to use phrases like, in order for me to have meaningful participation in the IEP process, I'd like to, I'm requesting, not just I like to, I'm requesting that my input be copied and pasted, and then that be used as the draft IEP that the staff adds to. So instead of the staff writing it, you reacting to it, you trying to squeeze in your stuff. No, you start out, you're proactive, you start the input in each section, and then the staff gets to react, the staff gets to put their input in. So, yeah, in some places, I mean, I love to live in the ideal world, and sometimes that doesn't happen. What is that? The ideal world is that the school and the parents, the end of September or whatever, would start meeting and talking about each other's priorities and what your child wants for this next year. And you write the draft IEP together while you're sitting there. That takes even a little bit more time. And, especially if you have an IEP at the beginning of the year, that's a busy time. So that would be my highest hope, that you could sit down together and write a draft. My realism is it's probably going to be up to you to shift things, and for you to change, and for you to know that being proactive is going to be so much more beneficial. And you're really going to get this personalized IEP for your child. So more. I love it. I love it. Thanks for adding all these comments and questions. So, are there any social skills assessments and social skills goals that you can refer me to? Would love to have a session around those in one of the future sessions. That's a great idea. The one program that I know a parent in our Connecting for Change group has been using with the school and has been so happy with is social thinking. So, and again, after the broadcast, I can put in the link for it. But if you just, do a search for social thinking, you'll come up with you'll get to their website and get those. Tamara, hello from Massachusetts, and she's also in our Connecting for Change group. Tamara says AI chatbots can write SMART goals too. Yeah, and the thing with the acronym SMART, you want it to be specific, and then the M usually stands for measurable, and I'm a big believer in measurable goals. However, I'm also a big believer in meaningful goals. So when I think of SMART goals, I think of specific, measurable, and meaningful, right? Because that's where, your input comes in as a parent. Like, how can we get your child to, learn how to do double-digit addition? And you already know some of the background information and knowledge that your child has, and you want to share that with the staff. Like that would be great information for your input into the present level section when they're talking about math. So yeah, you can get chatbots to write SMART goals, and you could say, write a 4th grade reading decoding goal, and you would get kind of what you get from a computerized goal bank, and not the one that I was recommending. But instead, whenever you use AI, you really have to make sure that you tell the AI tool about your child, what their strengths are, what specific needs they have. So the goal is individualized to your child. So you guys are asking so many good questions. I love it. Like I said, stay tuned. If you haven't liked this Facebook page, the Art of Advocacy, do that. Make sure your notifications are turned on, because throughout the week, I'll be doing some kind of follow-up on this session. And I'll also be sending out a newsletter with a summary of this with some additional tips. So stay connected, because there's so much that we can share with each other and that we can learn from each other. And that's the type of community that I think is most helpful for parents. So if we don't have any other questions or comments, thank you so much for being here. And remember, the goal that I have is for your child to feel safe at school, to be happy and learning beside their classmates every day. So until next time, we shall see you, and take care. Bye-bye.